We asked the general public, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word landfill?
Garbage.
Piles of trash.
Just like a waste of space. They're gross.
We then asked 50 scientists the same question to get their thoughts on landfills. Their responses were quite different.
Waste. Leachate.
Intoxicants, pollution.
Contamination.
Many people, when they hear the word landfill, think of municipal landfills that contain household waste. But did you know that there are several different types of landfills depending on your form of waste?
1 in 6 Americans live near a contaminated site.
Ever wonder where hazardous material is taken and treated?
Curious about what happens next?
Then come along with us
On a journey
of hazardous waste.
Have you ever heard someone talking about landfills and wondered what they were talking about? What about hazardous waste? Hazardous waste is a term that can be used to describe a lot of different types of waste. But what does it actually mean? When we asked a general audience, their answers varied quite a bit. We decided to ask someone in the hazardous waste business what this word means to them.
Well, I'm Madeline Wall. I work at the Department of Ecology in the Waste to Resources program. We deal with all things solid waste. Hazardous waste, it's also called dangerous waste in Washington State, is a waste that's harmful to people or the environment and needs to be managed so as not to harm people or the environment. It's regulated highly because it can be a hazard to people, human health, if it's not contained and properly managed. And it can be a problem to the environment if it's released.
One way that people can be exposed to hazardous waste on a daily basis is through contact with contaminated sites. Contaminated sites are places where natural or human processes have left waste that can be dangerous to human or environmental health.
Any process that removes contaminated material from a safe location, like a laboratory, and releases it into the environment can result in a contaminated site.
In Washington State, approximately 72% of people live within 1 mile of a site that is either currently being cleaned up or is awaiting cleanup. It is likely that you or a loved one have been impacted by one of these sites. The Washington State Department of Ecology is currently working to clean them up.
There's several ways that sites can become contaminated. A lot of the sites we deal with today were contaminated a long time ago by historical practices at industries before we had regulations to prevent that kind of contamination. And slowly those contaminated sites come to light as either they've caused some known problem or someone decides to develop the property and they go, well, you know, it used to be here, let's check it out first. It's important to clean them up because they're not controlled. And the contaminants, the chemicals that are there, say in the soil, can move. They can move to groundwater. They can move into the air or into buildings that are on the surface. And people, if they're not fenced off and controlled, people can wander in, animals can wander in and get exposure. So just to make our state a healthier place and prevent human exposures and health problems, I think it's an important thing to do, to clean up sites.
Contaminated sites are often cleaned up by removing the contaminated material. Many times, this is done through excavation. To learn a bit more about this, we talked to someone who is currently working to excavate contaminated material.
My full name is Bridget Cook, and I got involved with this project. The company that I work for, we're looking for people to work on the excavation site. The first step is determining where the most contaminated areas are and then what the outer boundaries are. So some of the areas were really contaminated, and those are the ones that we have to dig out.
Excavation is a popular tool for cleaning up contaminated sites because it completely removes the hazardous material. But doesn't this make you wonder what happens to the hazardous material once it's removed? Where does it go then? If the levels of contamination are high enough, the waste must be specially disposed of in a hazardous waste landfill. To learn a bit more about this type of landfill, we spoke with Dan Dusso from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality.
The landfills are heavily regulated and well constructed and designed to ensure that all of the toxic materials that are generated through current industry are properly maintained and controlled.
Hazardous waste landfills play an important role in containing and managing harmful waste. By cleaning up contaminated sites and ensuring that the removed material is controlled, we are helping protect our environment for future generations. In this way, landfills allow us to minimize risk to humans and the environment that we all share.
So I think it's really important to excavate it and get this contamination away from the site. And landfills can be controversial. You are moving the problem elsewhere. But I think it's better that it's contained and it's being controlled and it's not going to affect the environment around it.
Interested in learning more about how landfills work? Check out our
With the total amount of hazardous waste produced annually steadily declining due to an increase in recycling and green technology, one might begin to wonder what place hazardous waste landfills have in the future.
I think there's definitely a place for landfills, and at a contaminated site, you have the contaminated material and it's not being controlled, so it's potentially contaminating groundwater, surface water, exposing people. All of these things are risks, or they might actually be happening. I look at it as an improvement if it's not contained at the cleanup site location, but the facility that it's going to provides adequate containment of it so that it's not harming anyone at that new location or anything. I think that hazardous waste landfills have a purpose and are more controlled than they even were when the regulations were first written.
We asked 50 environmental professionals if landfilling simply moves the problem from one location to another. Just over half of them agreed. But let's ask a hazardous waste inspector their thoughts on this.
In some respects, you're concentrating it in one specific location, but what you're doing is concentrating in an area with a specific amount of controls that will protect the environment for the long term.
To keep landfills operating safely before, during, and after closure, they are heavily regulated and must obtain strict permits.
A hazardous waste permit lasts for 10 years, and every 10 years that permit needs to be renewed. Reason for that is in case there's different technologies that have come into play, or if there's new processes that the facility wants to do.
Let's talk to someone at a hazardous waste facility about what this permit means to them.
Our permit is about 3 feet of bookshelf. That's a lot of words, that's a lot of requirements, and between the federal regs, our operating requirements, there's an immense amount of scrutiny and activity that we do. But again, we need to have all of that in place to make sure that we protect the public, we protect our employees, and we protect the environment.
Disposal in a landfill is considered a permanent solution for hazardous waste. But what happens when it's full? Let's find out.
Our landfill, you can see the one behind me is about half full. We've got about probably 40 years of life left in this landfill. Once it reaches capacity, we'll put a final cap on that landfill. So it's basically an umbrella over the top. And then we go into what's called the post-closure monitoring period. And that post-closure period is a minimum of 30 years where we babysit the landfill. And that's probably the best term for it. We'll continue with our leachate removal, leachate monitoring, groundwater monitoring. We'll do visual inspections of the final cover system, again, for a minimum of 30 years.
What happens to the land after the landfill closes? Can it be used for anything else?
You don't want to do very much to a landfill once it's been closed, because anything that you you do at the surface could jeopardize the integrity of the landfill cap. So once a landfill, always a landfill.
Landfills are a place to permanently store hazardous waste, but this makes the land unusable for future generations. So we have to ask, are hazardous waste landfills the best option for dealing with this waste?
Why we need a hazardous waste landfill is there are materials that are hazardous. They need special processing, special handling, and at the end of the day, they're much better off to be in a protective environment like our facility that will keep them out of the environment. We'll know where they are, what they're doing, and we'll be able to monitor them for a long, long time. And again, it's all about protecting the environment. This is the best place for that type of waste.
Hazardous waste landfills reduce possible exposures, and they provide a long-term solution to a serious problem. What it all comes down to is keeping people and the environment safe from contamination.